This might be a record for a BIM lunch and learn here. We've got 41 people registered as a yes on the attendance.
Expectations are sky high. Don't disappoint.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. People can roll in as they do. And then obviously, if anybody misses part of this, this is all recorded and it'll be linked back to the BIM manual. Who is recording this? I know somebody else hit record.
I'm recording it.
Okay.
Here.
Can you fire me over the MP4 video file or whatever, and I'll log it with my YouTube stuff, so it's all in one place. Perfect.
Got it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to kick it off for about a 30-60 second here review of the BIM manual. And again, all of this is primarily thanks to Ephraim. He put in a ton of hard work testing this out, running it through the ringer, even drafting up this BIM manual article. It is at the top of the Twinmotion rendering dropdown on the BIM manual. It's really the only current up-to-date BIM manual article for Twinmotion. Not that the other ones are solely out of date, but it's the one that's most up-to-date for content. It gives examples, it gives the step-by-step and the bullet points on everything that he's going to run through today. So at that's all I had to contribute, and I'll stop my screen share and hand it over to you, Ephraim.
Thank you, Pat. 1 second. All right. So if I haven't met you yet, my name is Ephraim, and I've been with Walker Warner's since February. And for the later part of the summer, we started jumping into path tracing and finding out what that is. And basically, this presentation is to show you guys what we've been up to in our exploration, and also showcasing some of the projects that we put into path tracing, and some of the challenges that we had along the way. First of all, what is path tracing, and why it's only available in the VRPC currently. Some of the projects that we're diving into is Hollywood Bay, Casa Nocioli, and then Yellowstone. And then right after that, jumping into a Q&A and what this means for the firm in general, when for projects to use it and what to sort of expect. And then after that, we sort of jump into process. So if you haven't seen it in architecture already, you've probably seen it in movies and video games. That's where this technology was sort of developed and brought forth. And what it is essentially is it's the computer simulating light physics based on materials and where the camera is. And so it's doing a bunch of these calculations as soon as you turn on path tracing, essentially. And so,
sorry, Ephraim, can you share your screen?
Oh, wow. Whoops.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Just as a little background, so this is a new feature in Twinmotion. We've always had kind of access to what we call real-time rendering, which is the beauty of Twinmotion, where you just pop it in and it's easy and you can fly the live model and it cranks stuff up. This path tracing is kind of our version of basically doing the whole professional renders, kind of like we hire consultants to do. So Ephraim's been testing out a lot of these strategies. Everyone's probably seen some of our tests of these on the boards channel to different degrees of how much work we're putting into this. Some are just to spruce up our renders. Some are to do the full Diego special marketing pass. So Ephraim's going to give us a download of all of his studies, how far we take these, and how we can look to use these on our projects in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And so I was saying, we're diving into a few of the projects and then sort of breaking down the different challenges it takes along with the process. And so there's a few examples of like ray tracing in movies and stuff like that, and how this technology sort of developed. There's a little diagram of how it works. I know some like a verbal presentation might not work for us since we're all visual people. But it basically does this huge calculation of how light basically gets to the camera or to your eye. And what that means for the firm and how it's different from real-time rendering is that real-time rendering is how you move into Twinmotion, where you can just fly around the model. But for path tracing, it's more of a baked effect. And so it happens after you export. And so maneuvering over while it's on isn't really realistic. And it's also why this is more of a PowerPoint presentation, because it's so computer hardware heavy. And it's currently only available with PC and Windows and NVIDIA's graphics cards, which is why it's only available on the VR PC right now. So one of the first path tracing projects that took on in the office was Halve. And a lot of these steps were made the workflow a lot easier. Like the views were pre-chosen. I had to rehaul a lot of the entourage and the grass and trees. We focused on the exterior views. And then because this was still an earlier design phase, we used natural light and focused on that. And so that took a step out of the path tracing process where you have to adjust a bunch of the lights. So here's a few more examples of the shots. All the grass and everything that's visible is now in higher resolution. So if you have low poly or just basically non-textured grass, it becomes distracting once path tracing is turned on. And so it's really important that that pass happens and a lot more detail is added. Here's an example, I think a really good example of how, like, the advantages of it, because you can now see like the light bouncing off of the wood and then hitting the concrete and giving it a different color. And one of the last shots that took place for that. And then jumping into, there's a before and after shot of the kind of development that had to happen. The bottom is how I received the file and where it was at. And so it was a few days to populate it and to make sure everything is in the right amount of detail. And then to jump into Casa Cioli, for this one, it was specifically one shot that we needed to do. And so this one took 1 to 2 days, but how I received the file was in this state. And so all of the entourage had to be added because if it was path traced to that higher degree, a lot of it now becomes distracting. And the building's now in high resolution, but basically nothing else is. And so there was a full day of like populating that and making sure it's complementary. And then more recently, I was tasked with this project with Matt and Amadeo, and we're trying to see how far we can push this path tracing process, and how far so we can get into it. And so this was the culmination of a month's work, trying to replace all the assets with higher detailed ones. And each of these shots had their own little challenges. The contact shot, a lot of the background had to be thought of and modeled and made sure it was accurate to the site. A lot of the furnishings and the textures had to have their own paths, and each of these lights for each of these views, it's its own separate folder. So I had to recreate essentially all of it just for path tracing. So at this point, the file gets really, really heavy, and separate Twinmotion essentially had to be made just for this marketing purpose, and to this level. Here's an interior shot. So for interiors, lighting was specifically important, as well as the textures, because they're gonna show through the most. Each of these different things we had to like tackle, and yeah, there's a bunch of time for each of these little contexts. And so for the firm and moving forward, because it's only available for the VRPC, we're trying to, this is basically the point where I'm supposed to escape into not taking on as many path tracing projects because of the time constraints and the sort of hurdles that you have to get through, and having a really clean and clear Twinmotion workflow is just really important, and that time sort of adds up if it's not. So if anyone had any questions about the process for any of these, I'd love to hear it.
Ephraim, maybe can you go back to the comparison Halle Ube shots? And I think just to make sure we're all on the same page here, there's a couple of different projects here where Ephraim has put in, varying levels of work, and basically I think the directive was, to take our typical Twinmotion model, which looks pretty good. It runs great, and it's more of an in-house design tool, where you can quickly mock stuff up, you can fly live the model. And we were directed, Ephraim was directed to take these set views and really spruce them up. But even to just do this kind of little small adjustment to get these four or so updated views, not doing the whole marketing render pass, was multiple days of where you can see almost all the plants, where in the normal Twinmotion, you can usually get away with a sketchier model and gesture at stuff. When you get the really realistic lighting, everything looks hyper realistic. And if you have a crappy looking tree, you're going to be able to tell that in the whole render. So it's not really just the time it takes to hit export as opposed to looking at your live model. There's so many things going on that teams are going to want to be aware of if you're looking for the higher quality of light and shadows in the path trace view. You usually have to do a pass at updating all the planting, all of your building materials, how the building is actually modeled in these. So part of the work that we're trying to talk about is that to go from, maybe if you click through some of the other path trace shots for Halle Ube, all of these shots are, again, multiple days work to set up. So when we're doing this sort of in-house kind of low-level path tracing, just to get updated shots out, maybe for a client meeting, this is still a multiple days of work to set up the file, to redo the planting, add lights, finesse all of that stuff. So that's kind of more on the Halle Ube and Casa Nocciola level, where we just wanted to plug in our model and without really taking it into Photoshop or doing any of those other steps. When we separate those from the work Ephraim's done on Yellowstone, those are weeks and weeks of fine-tuning the model, buying premium trees, doing rounds of different Lightroom and Photoshop updates, which are really just for a marketing purpose. Normally, we're not going to really want teams to be doing the full multi-week rendering pass. It doesn't really work in our workflow, and that means we're taking someone who's working on the project and having them pause actually developing the architecture and be a full-time renderer. So those are some of the caveats we wanted to share with these sort of fixed still views, where it's a few days. These lend themselves more to if you have a special, maybe the end of DD client meeting or something that someone is really struggling. Maybe the clients are super visual and are struggling to understand something. That's when you say, okay, maybe 2 weeks before the meeting, we're going to take a designer off of developing the architecture and really budget out a week for someone to completely transform the Twinmotion model from our normal quality, which is the real-time rendering where you can fly around. It's a live working model to these prescribed shots where even still, we're not even doing the marketing level, but it's still multiple days of setup and work for these. So another factor is, once you kind of show a client one of these path trace renders, it's really hard to not show them a path trace the next time. So you're kind of committing to, if we're going to do this higher level of rendering, you're going to be locked into it for a while. So all these things, we've got this really new, powerful technology that I think everyone's gotten excited about with everything people have been testing about, have been posting and on the boards. But we just want to make sure for all project teams that exactly how much work goes into these, how much prep time's needed, and specifically that these are just going to be the still shots. This, for the upper image above, you're not going to be able to fly the client around in that view because it just doesn't exist in the live model, like Ephraim's eventually going to show us in his walkthrough. So for all those things, we can chat about, if using a path trace render and using the VRPC is appropriate for your project. For all these hyper realistic requests, that's a whole separate thing where, eventually Tom's working on getting a visualization team, or dedicated rendering staff / intern staff that's available to hop on those. But those aren't really something we're using widely in the office, those Yellowstone quality renders. This is more the Hale Ube and Casa Nocio and also OY Ranch examples are what we can kind of reasonably fold into our workflow at specific times. And even then, those are still multiple days of work, whereas normal Twinmotion, you can just load it in and you're ready to share the model.
Yeah, when we were, just to kind of like hit this home and reinforce it, when the BIM team was talking about what are we going to use this for and how do we emphasize where it's used, for those that remember having to save out a global illumination BIMX and getting the odd request in the morning, can you have this done by this afternoon? And the answer was always maybe, we'll try. With this level of rendering, it's more like, can you get that done by next week? And it's the same answer, maybe, we can try. It's a time commitment.
But in the end, you can just comparing these two, you can see how crisp the light and shadows are much more realistic. Textures, you're really seeing a lot more of those. And it can be a powerful tool when you just have to kind of use it responsibly.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying, guys. Should I jump in how to path trace?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. All right, before you even start to bring your project into the VRPC, it's highly recommended that you duplicate these views because once path tracing is on, how your lights that are already in your project are going to show up completely different in terms of like intensities and how the tones. So having separated folders for that can easily be toggled on and off and easily edited. This is really, really important. Also, resource collecting correctly is going to be really important here because you don't want to be trying to trace down materials while your project is in the VRPC and half of it is in the server, half is in desktop. You want to make sure all everything is already set and correct before you bring it in. Putting into the VRPC, since people can only use it one at a time, we're setting up the Walker Warner Devices calendar on Google so that you can label when you're using it, because if someone signs into it and somebody's already on it, they're kicked off, and you don't really know that, you don't get a notification. They just sort of get kicked off of it. So to access remotely, you'll need Microsoft Remote Desktop, and then when you're in the VRPC, locating your project on the server. In the VRPC, it's a little bit like this. It's a Windows environment, so it has every version of Twinmotion. So it's highly recommended that you open the correct version of Twinmotion first, and then you open your project within Twinmotion. If I can switch over. You guys seeing that? This is Casa Nocio. And once your project is in the VRPC, to turn on path tracing, it's going to sound really simple from here, But that's because everything in this file is already set up and already cleaned up, and all the lighting is already set. But this icon that's right here, it's always been there, but it's been disabled, so you couldn't click on it before. All you do is click on it, turn it on, and then it'll start calculating all these passes. Or you can just hit R on the keyboard, and it toggles it on and off, like so. And then there's varying levels of quality that you can set, and that's the number of calculations it does, and how many traces of light the computer does. And the more passes or sample rates, the higher the quality, but also the more time and the more taxing it is on the PC. So you want to set it low for test renders and seeing how lights come out, and then the higher setting mainly for those final exports when everything's said and done. And so adjusting the lighting and setting, when you turn on path tracing, it expands some of these settings for the image. This render tab, when it's turned off, looks like this. But once path tracing is turned on, it expands it for all of these little tweaks that you can make. Generally, the default settings that comes loaded in for Twinmotion is going to be correct. So you don't normally want to mess with these unless your render comes out looking a little weird, or the sky doesn't show up, for example. That's mainly when you want to be in this setting adjustments. Other than that, the biggest change is also this lighting tab. And then you're going to want to spend some time experimenting with how this now affects how the image comes out. Because prior to this, the lighting affects it kind of differently. And so how it comes out is completely different from a real time rendering example. So
Ephraim, can you show us what happens if you try and move the camera while you're in one of these views? Like,
every time you move, it'll restart the calculation, which is why you generally want to have your views set. You see that little circle, that means it's loading in. And when it's check marked, it's just about done. And I also want to say that this file is the least heaviest of all of those projects. It's really simple, and then we only rendered out this main view. So essentially nothing else is modeled outside of it. There's no interior lights folder, which is normal for projects that we want to bring into path tracing. And so this project file is really, really light, which is why it moves so smoothly, and I can share it on Zoom.
yeah, and even then, you know, you're not able to fly around it and look at different views with path tracing on. So this is kind of just trying to hone in on the difference between our normal Twinmotion model, which will still function when you're using some shots in path tracing. It's just, you know, being careful that you're probably not doing any modeling with path tracing turned on. These are really just like the final shots that you're picking the exact angle that you want to do, and only then you're turning it on and really finessing those shots. It's less about developing the whole model, like, which is how we usually use Twinmotion as a working design tool. And you can see even that folder called Path Tracing Additions is for what we call like the simplest model. You know, this is kind of what we were given. And Ephraim, you know, once you're looking at a realistic building, you really got to add in, you know, realistic plans, any of the context, you know, because it's really going to throw people off if you're not kind of looking at something cohesively. That also kind of doesn't lend itself to, you know, doing path tracing for any projects that are early in design phases. You know, often we don't want those. We purposefully don't want to make those renders or visualizations in the early design phases super realistic. You know, we want clients to feel like truly that the project is still in flux and design, and it's really tough when you show them a picture that looks like a finished building when you haven't even talked about details or any of that sort of thing. So all of these again are just caveats to talk about, you know, when you specifically when this is the tool that we're going to want to use. And for all other cases, the typical Twinmotion real-time rendering or even ArchiCAD model itself is probably going to be a better option to show clients or other consultants our design.
Matt, so the process of exporting is essentially the same as exporting an image, but now your ray tracing image has this little icon, and that'll differentiate it from all the other images that aren't ray traced. Before you hit export, you want to make sure that in the preview that ray tracing stays on, because as soon as you turn it off, it will turn off again, and so you might accidentally export it without it. And it'll also save to whatever you have the last quality setting. Which is really important. If you accidentally set it too high and you only wanted to do a test, you might find out that your export time is like 10, 15, or 20 minutes longer than you expected. So making sure that is set to low, or if it's time to set it to the highest, it could work. I won't do that for this PC because might might take over my Zoom and glitch out. Because as soon as it hit export, it kind of hijacks the processor, and it's not good. Tested it out earlier.
So we're kind of returning to how rendering used to be like 10 years ago, back when I was in school, where you'd have to click render and wait overnight for V-Ray or whatever you're doing to use your passes. You know, with path tracing, we're going back to that model to really get the highest quality, as opposed to our normal Twinmotion workflow, which was the huge breakthrough of real-time rendering, where the model's already rendered. All you do is hit export and it'll save you the perfect view that's as high quality as that. This is returning back to the full-on hitting export and waiting for the view to calculate, but giving us a lot better returns in the quality of the final image.
So just to wrap up this talk, I want to show an example of how that context shot of Yellowstone kind of turned out. This was like one of the earlier exports, and as you can see, the sky didn't show up at all, and so I had to go dive into the settings and finding out why it was doing that, and sort of like fixing all these problems one by one, and finding out what little tweaks and different things we can change to make the picture a lot more clear, and eventually culminating to post-process and what we're trying to move forward with now, and seeing how far we can take it. And so, yeah.
And these are looking amazing. And I think this was just, you know, as background, this is part of our internal work to see, you know, are we capable of in-house producing the kind of renders that we usually hire a dedicated render to. So again, this is not what typical project teams are going to be expected to do in the course of a normal architecture design workflow. These are a specific marketing task where we're spending weeks picking the perfect tree models that we're buying on the internet, not the default ones. We're taking these into Lightroom and Photoshop for days, you know, to finesse them. And there's always, even these, we kind of had to snip off and just, we could have kept working on them forever, taking the weeks that, you know, usually our consultants will spend to render these. So again, these are looking really great in comparison, or in addition to the other shots that we've shown from this project. And each of those is taking weeks to do, which is not what normal project teams are doing. Normal project teams, if you want to do path tracing, you're going to be doing more of a Halle, Ube, Casanocchiola style, where it's still a significant time investment, but completely separate from how we're doing it here.
Ephraim, really quick question. So I'm just kind of injecting this as I should be an obvious answer to this, but you're doing a lot of this work on your computer. You're not like taking over the VR computer for 2 weeks at a time, right? That's the output device. You're actually populating these models, building them out, getting them to that level of detail with lighting, with entourage trees on your local computer before you take it to the VR computer, correct?
Yeah, I'm using my own PC to render out these as well. So I don't use the VR PC in the flex space that's open to the office to use. But for the marketing tasks, I have my own setup for that.
But the typical user could set this up ahead of time on their computer, get all of the furniture, the street entourage, the trees, And then for whatever 12 hours it takes to push out the renderings, that's where they need the VRPC for.
Right. Yeah. All the lighting adjustments when ray tracing is on you can only do that with VRPC. Yeah, as much setting up as you can possibly do ahead of time.
So you want to pick your shots before you put them in the PC. And just another point is that even when you're remoting into the VRPC, it's still going to be a little bit laggy. So when possible, if you want to do this on your own project, you're probably actually going to want to come into the office and sit at the VRPC in person. You can still make it work remotely, but it will be a little bit slower. So just another tidbit.
So yeah, that's all I have on the slideshows. If anybody had any further questions.
Ephraim, I've got another question. What are the export options? Is it just going to JPEG, or can you do like RAW files that are much more editable in Lightroom?
It doesn't export RAW files, but it does export a higher quality in general. So I mean, just generally, you'd be able to make a lot more adjustments from there. I think at least for my workflow, I want to do as much in one program before moving it into the other. And so if you can get all the lighting settings done right in VR ray tracing Twinmotion, it's capable of doing that. But again, it's that like amount of time you spend doing all these different lights and making sure it's good. Because I think the moment you move it into Photoshop, you sort of lose a little bit more quality and it gets compressed. So show you this very first image where it was straight out of Twinmotion without any post-processing. So just a preview of what it can do. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. This is Leslie. I just wanted to kind of explain one thing about why we're doing these marketing level of renderings so that you don't think we're crazy. So, I mean, obviously this project is well underway in construction. And basically we're finding that with our new website, we want to feature more work in progress. And we are kind of like strategically picking and choosing which projects those are. We have a lot of California work, a lot of Hawaii work, but we don't have a lot of mountain projects. So we know we have limited resources. We're kind of identifying specific projects that we want to invest this time and energy so we can get those projects on our website. Because the fact is, as you guys know, from the time you start a project until you can actually finish it, and then wait a year for landscaping to mature, and then photograph the project, and then secure some sort of publishing feature, which takes an additional 6 months. It's years before we can get these projects any sort of recognition on our website. And it's just important to, when clients come to our website, for them to see that we have kind of a robust set of credentials. So I don't want people to get scared, like this is what every team's going to be expected to do, because I think Matt has like clearly spoken to that. But I just wanted to explain like why we are making this significant effort right now. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie, for the background. Yeah, and I think this is probably also good to just, we've chosen a few of the specific projects that are already underway that we're going to be taking into the step to get them onto the website. And Ephraim is still going to be continuing on part-time during the school year to help us take those projects and really take them to this marketing level of quality. So we're excited that we're going to keep his talents going for through the school year part-time, and he'll be only working on marketing renders. His services aren't going to be available for other projects because, as you can tell, I'll be trying to beat to death here that these take 100 hours to do these kinds of levels. But in the future, as the technology progresses, we're excited to see how teams are doing kind of the soft path tracing like we did with Hale Ube. And when the technology improves, we're going to be looking forward to always keep pushing the boundaries of what we can produce. But again, just setting the expectation for project teams that this is not something we're going to be able to produce as a part of our architectural workflow without either, giving it to a dedicated consultant like we do on projects, or having a dedicated rendering specialist in-house to do.
Matt or any from one thing I wanted to highlight or clarify is once you kind of go down the path tracing path, you have to kind of create like a whole separate copy of the file, right? That's like dedicated to the path tracing version.
Yeah, the file gets a lot super heavy, especially if you're adding in all these higher detailed entourage elements, and also like lights with shadows on their own can slow down a file a ton. So the best practice I think is to have a separate Twinmotion file specifically.
When you get into this kind of level of marketing stuff for the kind of Hale Ube example, you know, that one, it's going to bog down your file a bit. So I don't know, Ephraim, what your recommendation is for that, whether that's still a working file or kind of depends on project by project, how bogged down your model's going to be and whether you're still able to fly it live during a client meeting like we usually try and do.
Yeah, Hale Ube didn't have any lights in it yet, and that's usually a huge factor. So those ray tracing views are still in the main working Twinmotion, and I think that's okay.
And just out of curiosity, if you are you able to open a path tracing version of the model back on the Mac version? Obviously, it won't have the path tracing feature, but are you just even able to open it, or?
You can't adjust the settings within the view that has path tracing on. I can probably jump back into those.
The model will still run, but you can't do anything related to path tracing on a Mac.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
But I think the hypothetical there is like if you've done a couple of tests and you got it where you want, but you realize the landscape is really all messed up and you have to do like 20 hours of landscape work, you can pull it back to your local desktop so you're not working stop motion over the screen share, redo the landscape and then put it back. You just can't tinker with the path trace.
Yeah, and that transfer will take a long time.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much again, Ephraim. This was actually really awesome. I really appreciate all the work you did figuring this out.
Yeah, no problem. It's been really, really fun. It's like the part of it in school that I most enjoy, and being able to like take that so like as far as I can go has been really like awesome, just super enjoyable. So
Great. Well, we're all looking forward to seeing what you do next with marketing renders and for the whole office to see how how this makes sense to incorporate into our workflow, and I'll be keeping an eye on the boards for who's in it next. So I think that's it then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.